job.
Adaptability, that's like the strongest suit you can have as an actor.
You have to have this weird left-right brain balance.
The experience working with Luca Guadagnino is different than the experience working with Greta Gerwig. It was different from the experience working with Christopher Nolan.
You have to stick to your guns. You have to find something that you can do that maybe other people couldn't do.
So the only thing I know how to write about is something that is inside me.
You've got to be an observer of life.
It's a big team. It's not just me that creates this world, it's a huge team.
How you work within your relationship with the people that you're filming with is just everything.
Closest person I will be working with will be a costume designer.
You have to keep your fingers on that emotional pulse as an editor.
As an actor, you want challenges.
And not really ever let it go.
It's kind of important to not feel too safe.
Keep your heart in your sleeve as an actor. That's your instrument.
You have to be passionate. You have to work really bloody hard.
There's nothing more exciting for me than when someone creates chaos in front of the camera.
Even if you're pretending that you know what you're doing at the beginning, try to pretend properly.
Hey everyone, and welcome to producing your first feature. First of all, a big thank you to Filmstro for sponsoring the event. We're live streaming this session, so it'll be on the Guru website and on YouTube later. And if you're sharing highlights from today, don't forget to use the hashtag GuruLive. I'm Matimba Kabalika. I'm a talent development executive at Troika Talent, and we're joined by an amazing trio of producers who we're really thrilled to have with us today. Cecilia Frugiuele, who's the producer of Appropriate Behaviour and the award-winning Cameron Post, which is in cinemas now, and if you haven't seen it, you need to go and see it. And next to her is Julia Nottingham, who's the producer of X by Chelsea, Kingdom of Us, and another Sundance hit, Skate Kitchen, which will be coming out in cinemas on Tuesday, so make sure you go and see that. And Rachel Robey, who is the producer of The Leveling and Calibre, which you can catch on Netflix now. So 3 amazing producers. To kick things off, I think we're going to play the trailers of all the films, and then we'll dive into the conversation.
All that's left is your signature, and we're good to go. Now you're officially a disciple of God's promise. Welcome.
Welcome to God's promise.
You are at an age where you are especially vulnerable to evil.
Change will come through God, but within me.
We're going to spend our time together investigating what led you here.
In the past, I would resort to self-pleasure, but then when I learned that that was a sin also, I stopped.
Cameron, your struggle is with the sin of same-sex attraction. You're facing the consequences of your actions, and it's ugly.
What's your deal anyway?
I guess it's like having your own Disney villain. Only this one won't let you jerk off.
You don't really seem like the kind of person that'd be here.
We didn't have a choice. Did you?
You better be ready for the dark days.
I mean, couldn't we just walk off?
And go where? What's worse, karaoke night or living on the streets?
Where does my heart beat now?
Tough call.
You'd rather hate the road not to look back.
Are you at that place? Tell us about that girl you knew from home.
The first step is for you to stop thinking of yourself as a homosexual.
I don't think of myself as a homosexual. I don't really think of myself as anything. I'm tired of feeling disgusted with myself. You have no idea what you're doing, do you?
Stop it!
I was feeling really lonely. That loneliness that you have, even in a crowded room. But I don't feel it anymore.
Do you have a
type. I like boys, okay? I like boys.
No, boys are just uneducated.
Hey, can you do an ollie?
No, bro, I'm a poser.
You use tampons?
You don't?
Can't they kill you?
What?
Hey, Mom. Yeah, I'm at the library.
Hey! Slow down!
¿Dónde carajo has estado? No more skating, promise me.
You know you can stay at my house if you need.
Yeah, I was seeing you at the park the other day. You were killing it.
Skate or die, bitch.
You like? No, I don't.
Camille, are you kidding me? I'm doing my thing.
What's wrong with the kiddie pool?
Why are you skating with them?
Promise me you look after yourself.
I'm going hunting.
So how you been? All this baby shit, it must be mad.
I know, I'm sorry. I know you always wanted to be the one I got pregnant.
Marcus, Trenton and Bond Carter. 3 nights?
That's right, yes.
You guys picked the perfect weekend to be here. It's boozy as hell.
Well, you boys have a good day's hunting out there, eh?
We will.
Reckon you can take down a deer?
Probably not, no.
Not everyone can do it.
We just go to the police and go to the police. It'll be considered murder. We go to that town, we come back here tonight. You have no choice.
Successful day stalking?
We're putting together a search party.
What were you doing last night?
What real evidence have we got? Nothing.
We were wrong. I'm not going to pay for it.
Let's go!
Everything I did here, I did to protect us. I'm so sorry.
That's not going to be enough. That's not going to be nearly enough.
Really exciting. So I hope you know that I wasn't exaggerating when I said 3 brilliant producers, like really amazing work, and make sure you catch up with it if you haven't seen any of those films. So guys, I've got loads of questions, but before we start, it'd be really good to get by show of hands who in the audience is a producer. Okay, and writers. Lots of writers, yes. Writer-directors. Okay, and what about directors? Okay, so a really good mix of people in the audience, and we've got loads of questions for these guys, and hopefully there will be a chance at the end for you guys to jump in. I guess the first thing I want to start with is talk about how you guys got into producing to start off with, and at the point that you got into it, what did you actually think the job was? Who wants to kick off? Julie, I feel I can see that you want to kick off.
I got into producing, I suppose, generally in this sphere, because I worked in TV for a long time, making documentaries, which I loved, but I always didn't necessarily watch the product I was making, but all I would do was watch feature-length documentaries and feature-length films. And so just made it my aim to just do whatever I could to get an in, doing that. And, did that kind of quite thing of just hounding companies, I suppose. And so I had my TV credits and just hounded all the companies in London that made feature documentaries, and luckily Pulse, responded, and so for me it kind of went from there, really. And I think it for me it's always been, if you feel passionate about the story, then you can kind of, do it, whether it's fiction or documentary, because I did my first fiction this year and it was actually not that different, well last year, sorry, not that different from feature-length doc.
And were there any big surprises, though, in terms of what you initially thought the job was going to be, or because you'd come from TV, was it quite similar?
I suppose, like my kind of, I've always been an organised logistics, trying to make everyone be friends type person, and I feel like maybe once, like producing definitely isn't rocket science in terms of putting the shoot and doing all of that. It's really the relationships, I think, and trying to, and having the perseverance as well. So I think the big thing that I've learned since starting is really the perseverance, because I think unless you have perseverance, then you films are very hard to make, basically. So yeah.
And Cecilia, what about you? How did you get into it?
Well, I was studying film at university, which was kind of a bit of a waste of time in a way. It was like just film studies. It was a lovely program at Queen Mary, but
oh my God, I did the same one.
Hey,
yeah.
Okay, then we have to catch up and tell all the names of the lovely. It was
not that much
great.
of a waste of time.
Yeah.
Well, no, but it was. I know exactly what you mean.
It was great, but in terms of like there wasn't much on hands-on.
Yeah.
In terms of production or whatever. And so then I went to Shooting People, and on Shooting People, I just started like working on. I remember like doing this one feature film where I literally done. Every single role. I was like casting assistant, then like script supervisor. One time they asked me to focus pull on 35 mil, and I literally was like, that's where I drew the line. But it was interesting because I kind of got to see like how it was my first time on a feature set, and I was 21. I was really excited, and I kind of saw all these different roles and moving pieces, and I was like, oh, okay. Well, if you're a producer, you kind of get to be a bit of everything. I mean, not focus puller, obviously, but like, I don't know, I kind of felt like it was a bit something I could, dip my toes in. And then through Shooting People, I also met Olivier Camphor, who then became my business partner, and we started this company together. So it kind of.
You guys met on Shooting
I know.
People.
We always said that we met online, which sounds like it's like Tinder or something. No, but so we started doing short films together. But I think it wasn't until I started working with Desiree, who I met at Queen Mary, so it really wasn't a waste of time.
Oh my God!
I know. I should take everything I said back. But I think until I met her, which became my first like real collaborator, I guess I didn't really understand what producing could have been, in terms of like working with a director.
It's really interesting. We'll come back to that. I wonder if we were there at the same time.
No, 2007, I graduated. Anyway, we'll do it.
Yeah, God. Rachel, what about you?
Well, actually, I met Paul Andrew Williams of London to Brighton on Shooting People. So, we have lots of Shooting People success stories here. Well, my story started in the late 90s because, my story started in the late 90s. I graduated from a media course that again, wasn't quite what I was expecting. But one of the tutors on that course also taught another course, which was practical film and video making skills, because back then, there wasn't even, offline editing didn't really exist. We're talking a very, very different time in the industry. So after I graduated, I went to do this one-year course, which is where I met my lovely husband and other collaborators. We all did this course together. And I left that course absolutely set on being a sound recordist. That's what I wanted to do. And so that's where I entered the industry as a first point of call. And then after a couple of years of trying that, we really weren't getting anywhere. Al wanted to be an editor, who's obviously now a producer as well. I wanted to be a sound recordist, and this other friend wanted to be a cinematographer. So we decided we would just make a load of films ourselves, not tell anybody that we'd been the producers. I'd just say I was a sound recordist on all of them. And, so we'd have some credits on our CVs. So we raised a bit of money from what became EM Media, the regional fund. We borrowed a film camera from Ari. We got a local theatre to insure it for us. Like, we did all these things. We got a free box of short ends from Peak Practice. It was a TV show, because back then they were shot on film. And we shot these 3 short films in a week in the early part of the year 2000. And after we'd done that, B and Al were like going, did you really like producing those films? And he's like, yeah, I really did. And I was like, yeah, I really liked producing those films too. And so that was, we switched direction and we set up the company that year and got another commission to make a short film for TV. And then I met Paul on Shooting People that year too. And we made a film called Royalty that played at the London Film Festival. And that was really just the start of that journey. So we just sort of had to admit to ourselves that what we thought we wanted to do wasn't what we should be doing at all.
It's really interesting. Like, I guess the thread for all of you is different ways of finding your way into it, and kind of perhaps the thing that you first liked about it wasn't the thing that kept you in, but one key thing that you've all mentioned is relationships, and I think that's something crucial to everyone in this room. When you're early on or you're emerging in your career, you get approached a lot by people who want to work with you, and everyone wants someone to produce a film, and I think everyone does it. It's a bit like dating, no one knows who to go for, and I guess I'd love you guys to talk a little bit about how you chose your creative collaborators earlier on. Like, how did you know that Desiree, you know, how do you make those relationships? If you could talk about a little bit about that, but also how that's changed now that you've done a lot more stuff. Whoever wants to kick off?
Well, yeah, so Desiree, by the way, is Desiree Ackerman, the director I work with, not just like my friend Desiree. But I met her at university and we became friends first. And for 7 years, we were just friends. And she went back to New York. She was doing a year abroad in London. She went back to New York, started NYU, and we were just best friends. And then she started doing a show called The Slope with her ex-girlfriend, girlfriend at the time, and I just was a fan. I always when I met Desiree, like we did our first short film together that she wrote. And she always says, like, you produced it. I did not. I literally was like, it was all, it was a bunch of dudes in her class, and then Desiree and I. And they were lovely dudes, but I was really shy and kind of was like just relegated to be like the script supervisor. I mean, which on a short film is usually the person that just told to shut up. But anyway, but besides that, I always just like...
But very valued.
Yeah, very valued. It's really important as a job, but not on a short. But no, it is on the short as well. Anyway, but with Desiree, I was just a fan. I really was like, she made me laugh, I made her laugh. And then that's when in 2012, I heard that she wanted to do a feature based on the Slope, and she already had a draft. I was like, I want to do it. Like, I was just like, with Parkville, we were looking at the time, to like, put together money through EIS, and I was like, I think even though it is in America, we can put it together here. But yeah, it was just like recognizing, I guess, the talent and trusting, having faith in her, maybe more than I had faith in myself. But that was really good, like really easy for me to push because I knew she'd deliver.
And what about you guys?
I suppose for me, I'm doing Lucy's next film. So Lucy Cohen directed Kingdom of Us, which was a feature doc from last year. And I suppose for me, and I think it's so true, when I meet writers and directors, and especially when I met Lucy, I was kind of so blown away by the way she talked about her stories that I was kind of just transfixed on her, and I think I always see our relationship as something in which I hope we're going to make 10 films together, and it is such a friendship, and friendships do get tested because these films are so hard, but they kind of, you stick through them, and actually it's I think there's something, there's something that you can't put your finger on with those relationships that makes you, stay with them. And I think very much what you said, I had kind of more faith in her than I did in myself. And I was like, as long as I stick with her, it will all be fine. And so I tended to do that, like when I'm very overwhelmed by someone's talent, whether that's, their eye for their visuals or the story, I just, and you do end up spending so much time with this person. Like, I would honestly say Lucy and I maybe text each other, every day or every other day, and that's quite intense for a work relationship, but it kind of works. And the same with Crystal and I. We'd been friends for a long time, and I'd really admired her. So the minute this opportunity came on, I just kind of jumped at it, and yeah, it is so much to do with those relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the way we're really talent-led as well. Like, I know lots of producers find material in lots of different ways, but we almost always start with the person, like the key creative talent. And quite often what we end up making with that person might not be the first thing they brought to us. They might have brought us a project that we sort of think it's great, but then in starting to work with them, we'll almost always find a different thing to do together. somehow. You know, so it's often less about the actual project they've brought in and more about them and the relationship that we can have. I mean, you know, CALIBRE was nearly 9 years, 10 years since we first started working on that script to it being made. And we're working on another film that's quite close to hopefully going into production. I've probably just jinxed it. But, you know, that one, I think we've had that project on the book since 2006. You know, like these projects take so long to get together that if you don't have that close creative working relationship, it would be so hard to carry on.
I mean, it's really impressive, and it's, you know, longevity will come to longevity and sustainability later on. But I think, you know, I guess for people who are still emerging, how do you have the confidence? I think it's quite interesting that it feels like for all of you it's felt instinctive, but when you first started, was there, I mean, okay, before those people, were there other relationships where you'd maybe thought, okay, this is it, and something didn't work? And then how do you, I think, especially I'm talking about as producers, but it could be as a writer or director where you kind of think, right, I found my person, and then it kind of doesn't happen. How do you have a due north? Is there something that you were kind of going back to?
I mean, it's a really, I mean, I could tell you later a whole load of relationships that probably didn't work out quite as I hoped, but maybe not in this arena. I mean, look, it's really hard, you know, when you make a film with somebody, especially if it's quite successful, and you have a vision for your future together. And I think that's particularly hard when you're working with first-time filmmakers, because of course, you know, people have got career ambitions of their own. So, you know, often somebody's second film won't automatically come to you. I just think I've done my best work. And perhaps in the future that relationship will come around again full circle. I think you just have to be a grown-up about it. And, you know, there's that adage about letting something go. I think you just have to do it with good grace and know that it's not a personal thing for them. They have to do what's best for themselves ultimately. And maybe you feel a small crushing disappointment deep down within yourself, but you let it go.
Yeah, and I also think, like, you know, in terms of writer, you know, for writer and directors trying to meet producers, I think you've got to, it is a little bit kind of dating-like in that you maybe do have to meet quite a few people before, and not necessarily going for, like, the best ever producer or the one that's made something as similar to yours, because actually, again, it's, I think, having the start of a relationship, if, you know, as long as you're really passionate about that story and the producer sitting opposite you wholeheartedly believes in what you're saying, then I think you've got to go, you know, down that road. But I do think, you know, I've had definitely, you know, people that I probably won't work with in the future. And again, you just have to be grown up about it. And I think that the best thing you can do is kind of, you know, treat people with respect and, you know, because it's also such a small community as well.
It is, and also after a film's finished, you know, the relationship has to continue because there will always be inquiries, there'll always be things coming up. So if you really burn your bridges, you know, you're going to make your future career quite difficult because those relationships do have to continue.
And I've literally only done 2 features and only with Desiree, and we're still in this kind of like honeymoon phase where we look at each other like, I could never live without you. But at the same time, I feel like, I don't know, I feel like there's something about it. I understand, like, you know, we probably will do things, you know, apart, and I have other projects with other directors, you know, it's like, but I do feel that, like, in terms of like directors, like when you find the producer that you sort of like growing with, don't discount the fact that, like, you know, don't get attracted by the, like, you know, the fancy lighting of some, you know, fancy lighting is not a word. Fancy lights of whatever, something that like a bigger producer, a bigger company could offer you, because there is something really so special about somebody who has your back and just your interest at heart, rather than someone who might be an agenda, which is a perfect agenda, but I mean, I don't know what I'm saying. Anyway, stick to your... I
think that's really good advice about kind of finding your peers and
finding your peers,
together.
Exactly.
And that's really interesting in terms of the longevity and pushing through how hard it is to get projects over the line. Actually, it's about that relationship and having the same vision. I kind of want to talk a little bit about how you guys came up as well, and finding, I guess, a moment that was either a big break. That's a separate one, but I guess let's talk about how the first time that maybe you've been doing stuff independently and then all of a sudden other people are involved, financiers and execs and stuff like that. Can you talk about navigating that and how you managed that?
Well, for me, certainly, we had always been working quite independently because we're based outside of London, we're in Nottingham, and that is definitely a different experience because you have to grow your company and your practice in a slightly different way. But we had been doing stuff independently, but I'd also been quite lucky because I'd been involved in stuff that was funded through short films. So back in the days of the Film Council, before the BFI, I'd produced a whole raft of shorts through their digital short scheme, which had meant that I'd really got used to working with commissioners, and I'd done some stuff in serial drama. I'd been the production coordinator on Crossroads, the soap opera back in the day, which was actually a really brilliant job. But again, I'd been used to working with executive producers through that. So I had that experience, which meant that when I was able to start looking for proper funding for features, I think that probably made it a little bit more straightforward to navigate. And when we made London to Brighton, which was now, you know, back in the mid-2000s, we'd originally started with that film with private money. And then halfway through the production, the Film Council had come on board, which again was quite a nice way to structure that production, because then on our first film, we did have proper backing. We did have a proper relationship with those funders, and that definitely helped us for the next films.
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely, I was about to say learnt the hard way, but it's really, especially on feature docs, because the budgets are really tight and you're kind of taking money from, well, you know, receiving money from as many places as you can. That's probably the single hardest thing I find to deal with, is when you've got maybe, you know, 8 different voices, you know, giving you feedback on what they think the film should be. You've got 8 different people to communicate with. Sometimes the 8 people don't want to all speak on the phone at the same time. Like, I've found that incredibly stressful, and I'm hoping as I grow as a producer, I can make more films with less partners, because it's really stressful. And I think, you know, as a producer, the weight of that responsibility, trying to make sure, you know, all the communication is there, is tough. So I'm definitely learning and growing as a producer, because now I want to try and work with smaller amounts.
I have to say, like, the second film we made had something like 16 signatories to the inter-party, which was just like, having gone from London to Brighton, it was so small, it was crazy. But you know what, we had an amazing mentor. Chris Collins was the exec on... Sorry.
That's what you need.
Yeah.
I think, and sometimes I really felt like, gosh, I just need someone to pick up the phone.
And it wasn't just Chris, I had another mentor in Kate Ogborn as well in my early stages. So I had these great, fantastic people who I could pick the phone up to all the time, and they were just so helpful. So I think when you move to that bigger film with all of that complexity, sometimes having like an independent advocate for you in the process to help you. I mean, my goodness, you know, I learned so much from them, and they were very generous with their time to help me. And it's just so appreciated, and that's something that can definitely help you as a newer producer.
For me, it's like, because my 2 features like were set in the States, so it was different. Like with Appropriate Behavior, we had put together a small amount of money ourselves, so we had no, you know, exec per se or financier, which was also kind of daunting, because it's just like, you know, 2 people looking at each other and say like, well, I guess we're done with development. That's true, and you kind of do want a bit of a mentor, somebody telling you what to do, but you just have to trust your guts. And with Cameron Post, we had, you know, Beachside was financing, and they were just, the most amazing partner for us, because they really understood and valued my relationship with Desiree, which meant that, like, literally, I think Michael gave us 2 notes on set, and they were brilliant. And then they just, you know, really understood, like, in terms of allowing us more time in the edit room. But it kind of meant that, like, we sort of limited ourselves. We went to the people who could only give us, you know, just $1 million and a bit, you know, dollars. Like, we, you know, but it was right for this movie. Like, this movie had to be kept a bit on the down low.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's really interesting. I'd love to hear you guys, you know, you're kind of talking about the jump, especially going, I guess, from shorts or earlier work into producing features. And I guess, how would you encourage people in terms of, how can you hone your craft or develop your craft? Because in a way, it's kind of like, who is there to tell you what to do? It's a massive, that's a completely different thing, going from having 1 exec on a short to having, 16 signatures. I mean, like, how, if you were kind of looking back, what advice would you give your past self about what to do to get ready for that?
Like, the thing, and again, this is going to feel like out of reach, so it's kind of an annoying thing. Like, I think earlier on, there wasn't, like, you don't have much access to cash, I suppose, so you can't get a lawyer that's decent. And then, like, recently, I kind of, like, decided I'm going to find a lawyer that's, like, going to help me through this. And meeting him has kind of almost changed things really dramatically, because they can actually talk you through it. And obviously, as a first-timer, you know, I didn't have that, and it was very difficult to kind of understand. So I think going back to what you said about mentoring, I think if you can, as a first-time producer, try and find people, and whether that is like a film financing lawyer or another producer, because I even still think, well, you know, I've got loads to learn, and I love the idea of having a mentor, and I'm always like looking for, you know, ways that I can apply for a mentor, or, you know, think, okay, I'm going to send the email to, you know, Elizabeth or whatever, and, you know, so yeah, I'm a big mentor fan, I think.
It's weird, like, I think, you know, way back when, I mean, apart from making facetious comments about marrying somebody with loads of money, which is not helpful to anybody, I think, you know, I came up through physical production, which I count very importantly towards my development, because it's meant I've always been able to keep my films on budget, I've always maybe been able to make them for less than people expect. But at the same time, when I was earlier in my career, I didn't understand the lack of enthusiasm other people might show for my physical production past. So I hadn't understood that if you're going particularly into broadcast, if you haven't been a script editor or worked through that other side of creative development, that my skills might not be appreciated. I hadn't understood that people would not think that I was good at development if I'd come through physical production. And obviously now, looking back, I can see why certain things in my career happened in certain ways. And I think a lot has been to do with having a background in physical production. And that's just something I think people have to understand, is that producers come through lots of different routes and different people will value different parts of your experience. You know, like I still hear people say, oh, but you're a line producer. I think I've never line produced a film. I have never line produced a film, you know, ever. And yet that is what people think my experience has been. So I think that's something that if I could go back, I would try and maybe work harder to change that perception at an earlier stage.
But it's interesting because it's like, I think like I consider myself a creative producer, but I feel like you need to earn your, you know, you earn that title in a way by getting your hands dirty. Like, I think, like, obviously I don't have the level of experience that you have, but I feel like every time I've done a short films and then my feature, like, if I'm there in production putting up fires until, like, obviously then we start shooting and I have my line producer and production coordinator and I'm next to the director. But I mean, I remember like meeting somebody when I was you know, doing short films, and we're about to do a short film together, and she was like, what are your strengths? And I was like, well, I know I can do this. I know that I can, you know, put it together, produce it in that way. You know, physical production, she was like, great, because I'm a creative producer. I was just like, oh God, it's just like, you know, it was an NFTS graduate. But in a way that kind of like, they do teach you to just like, you know, walk around and have your coffee and kind of see other people doing your job. And now, yeah, you need to earn the, you know, title, I feel.
You know what, I'll tell you, this is probably highly indiscreet, but I don't...
It's fine, we're live streaming, it's fine.
Yeah, it's fine. On a film I made, you know, in the last few years, I remember I was on set and there was an executive producer on that film, and that person, I won't even mention their gender, that person swanned across the set with their coffee, and I was thinking, this is where I'm going wrong. I've never swanned around with a coffee. Maybe I should swan around with a coffee, you know, and actually, it just was a real wake-up call to me, because even I was like acting as if that person was really like worthy of loads of respect. Yeah. But I mean, I think it is true that producers have lots of different skills. Like, there are some producers who just live for the money, the wheeler dealing, and, you know, when the deals get done, they get so excited. And then there's the people who are really good at keeping everything on track, like the physical production. Then there's the people who absolutely love development. But, you know, for us at Wellington Films, we do all of that. We do everything from start to finish. But if you feel that some of those things are outside of your experience, or you don't like doing them, the best thing I think to do is to partner up with somebody who has that skill that you're missing. You know, there's no disrespect to, you know, you've got to understand yourself as well and what your own sort of professional limitations might be, and sort of plug those gaps, I think.
Yeah, and ask questions, definitely. Like, I think my mentor is the line producer of Appropriate Behavior, then was a producer on Cameron Post. I literally like, I'm a call asking for help because I'm desperate about something, so.
I think that's really important, being able to ask for help, because I think especially lots of producers feel that they have to know, especially, you know, you're talking to a finance, you're like, I've got to know everything. But everyone, you know, that thing of asking questions and finding people to ask those questions to. I'm also wanted to kind of flip it in terms of thinking more from a writer and director's perspective. I guess, you know, if you're a writer or director and you're looking for a producer, I think it's quite interesting that you're saying all producers are different, and that's something that you've all... How, as a, you know, writer or writer-director, do you know what you should be looking for in a producer?
I suppose it depends, like, what stage you're at, if you've got a script and you know that someone wants to give you money for it. So, but I presume most people might, you know, have their idea and need someone to help them get development for it. And again, I suppose maybe I'm like a one-track, whatever the phrase is. You know, just as long as they've got a real passion for the story, and you know, I would give them a little bit of leeway. Like they're not going to turn it around, you know, in a month or whatever. You know, I think you've got to be aware of, you know, the fact that everything takes time, and that also we all have to work with. And I think that's the big thing. Like, you know, you say, oh, you know, imagine if a writer-director goes and works for someone else, but as producers, we have to work with other people. Yeah. So I always think, you know, you just got to accept it. But yes, I would, again, you know, realize it's not going to happen overnight, and it's about developing that friendship and being open about exactly what your goals are and exactly what you view success as, and trying to make sure those two things are lined up.
I mean, I think that is so true, like that holistic approach to film. Like, I think now at the moment in the industry, films tend to fall like into sort of films that are quite cultural or films that are more overtly commercial. Obviously, all films are commercial, but ones that are, you know, absolutely market-driven. And I think that it's quite good to think about producers that fit into the right sort of bracket of those two camps. And, you know, if you're trying to research a producer, you don't always want to tell them that you've got a film exactly like the last one they made. Like, you know, so after London's Brighton, we would go, no, I've got this film, we can make it on barely any money. I was thinking, no, I don't think I want to do that again. So that isn't always the best thing to do. But the British Council's got a brilliant website, a whole directory of films. And I think in a way it can be better than IMDb, because you can often find the producer's contact details on there rather than just a generic office address.
Everyone will thank you for that.
Yes, they will. You know, it's actually quite a user-friendly website, so often you can do a bit more, some quite good research on there into the sort of films that people are making. Like maybe not exactly like what you're doing, but things that feel like they might be from the same world. Maybe the right sort of funders or the right sort of budget level, you know, the right sort of, are they very art house, are they thrillers? You know, I think that's quite a good place to start.
Can I flip and say what a producer should look for a director and a writer? I don't know why, but I feel like obviously writer-director just like flip it back. But it's like somebody that like I'm looking for somebody who values my opinion and really trusts me, so that I don't have to sort of like, you know, manipulate it in a way. And then, yeah, that listens. Not listens like in a kind of like, you know, let me tell you what's right and wrong, but yeah, that just values your opinion. But also somebody, especially starting out, who I know has the passion and the fire under their bum. Can you say that?
Yeah. You said it.
That, like, because it's like some, you know, like I knew, for example, that Desiree would have done a feature version of Appropriate Behavior, a different version anyway, because she just needed to do it. And when you're starting out, you might have the best script ever, but also you don't have so much to offer. So you can't just expect a producer to just like, you know, with a magic wand make it happen. So I think like for me, it's just somebody really, really is gonna push themselves as much as I can push them.
Really good advice.
And actually, just to reiterate that, on Skate Kitchen, Crystal Moselle, so I met her, when she said, this is what the film I want to make, it was September 2016, and then she said, by the way, I'm making it next summer, and I was like, really? And she was like, yeah, it's, you know, it's going to happen. And sure enough, it was really like every step of the way, like every week, it was just her pure determination for that film to happen that made it happen. Obviously, you know, she had producers and we got financiers and all of that, but really, it was all her. It was, you know, and it was her and I'm always floored. Out of everyone that I have worked with, her determination is kind of like nothing you've really seen before.
Just to add just the tiniest cat, I think, you know, that's an amazing story. But at the same time, you've got to trust that your producers are doing stuff. Yeah. Like, we've worked with people, like, they want, like, instant responses to everything. And A, it's a bit exhausting. And B, you think, goodness, you know, we need a bit of thinking time here as well, you know. Like, you've got to trust. So, you know, obviously in that 9 years, say, for example, that got CALIBRE from start to finish, obviously, you know, we weren't every single day committing many hours to that. You know, there were fallow periods, there was times when we were trying to raise development money. And I think it's really important that there's this relationship of trust between the director and the producer, that everybody's doing their best.
And then trusting that like things happen when they, you know, when time is right, and things do happen like for a reason in terms of...
And I suppose just to add the Crystal thing is the Skate Kitchen is using non-actors, and so those girls, and after I met the girls, I understood what she meant was, she said, look, this is the last summer where they'll have that kind of innocence of character. You know, they were all going 18 to 19, and they, you know, were all going to college the next, And so she just was like, unless I do it this summer, next summer they'll, you know, have lost their virginity, blah, blah, blah. You know.
I guess also it's a balancing act, isn't it? Because I think there's a difference between going, oh, this is what I've been up to. It's an exchange rather than what have you done? Because I think sometimes people assume that a producer's got to do everything for them, and it's like, no, it's a collaboration. And actually, what excites, it's interesting to hear from all of you that you enjoy working with people. It's an exchange. It's not somebody's like, oh, what have you done for me today? It's kind of like not what that is. But let's talk about time, actually. So you led us on nicely there, Rachel. How long did it take for everyone's first features to get off the ground? And I guess, were all your first features the first features you thought they were going to be? Does that make sense? As in, was your first feature the one that you thought was going to be your first feature? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think, well, so it took us 5 years from starting the company and starting making our own short film productions to stepping out on set on London to Brighton. That was 5 years. And in that time, we had optioned quite a high-profile book, but I'm not sure we ever thought that would be our first film because it was quite a big budget and it obviously never went anywhere in the end. But London to Brighton was quite interesting because we'd made this short film with Paul in the year 2000, and then we'd had quite a difficult relationship and he'd gone off to America. But we'd said that if he ever rang us, we would just do whatever he came back to us with, because at the time he was just the best director we'd ever worked with. He was brilliant. And then it was really weird. I won this camera from Television Magazine, right, on this weird day. And then I was telling this story to somebody else about how we would just work with Paul if he came back to us. And then my phone rang and it was Paul, like that minute. It was really, I had this weird day of weird coincidences, and he brought us London to Brighton, but he said he would only do it with us if we would shoot it in 3 months' time. We were like, what? And so if we wanted to do the film, we had to agree to do it on this tiny budget and shoot it within the next 3 months. And we were like, okay, we've said this is what we're going to do, and that's what we did. And so our first film was a bit sort of odd. It wasn't like a normal route to market. We just had to get on board, basically, which we did.
Yeah, mine was kind of similar, because my first, my first film was The Possibilities Are Endless, actually, and that...
that's a lovely film.
Yeah, that did kind of go to plan in terms of everything else. But after that, the things that I thought were going to come next, like Kingdom of Oz took 4 years, and it took so long to get the money, and so much waiting, and so much frustration on Lucy's side saying, oh, can we apply for this now? And I'd be like, look, we're just not ready. You know, we don't have the right material, we haven't got... And I think that's a big thing that, you know, is quite hard, you know, when it comes to writer-director-producer relationships, when one person thinks you are ready and the other person thinks you're not. And I think you test, you know, yourselves then. And I think, yeah, you've got to obviously find a middle ground. But yeah, so I think time, you just got to be in it for the long haul and persevere, basically.
And well, for us at Parkville, Olivier Camphor had produced a film called Borrowed Time, which was made under the microwave, the Film London microwave. And that had been an interesting experience because it had been commissioned, I think, at the end of 2009, but it didn't shoot until summer 2011. And it was a long, you know, drawn-out process of development. So after that one, we were looking to do something that we would put together a small amount of money ourselves. So for Appropriate Behavior, we started working on the script in 2012, and we started shooting in summer 2012, summer 2013, we were on set. So it felt, especially for his first feature, and coming from a sort of UK approach of doing things, of like public funding and development and stuff, it felt really fast. Yeah. And I think the film is flawed, you know, like it's the first feature, but there's an energy to it that I feel like if we had gone through it's sort of more like, you know, a British development route could have been lost potentially. But yeah, so.
But with London to Brighton, it was quite interesting because Paul had been in development with a lot of major funders, and it had been quite a slow process. So writing London to Brighton was a reaction against that, which is exactly why. Because we were like, oh my God, this can be so exciting. We'll raise £1 million, we'll go to the Film Council. And he was like, no, that's not how this is going to happen.
And I guess you learn to be a bit less precious, but with the right voice behind it, I think it really works.
Yeah, exactly. So I think sometimes that lengthy, you know, it's very frustrating, I think, for anybody trying to get their first film made where you can be in development for 3 years. It feels like a long time, I think, for them.
And because sometimes you try to push things in a box, you know, but it's a privilege in a way, like, you know, and fast.
That's quite interesting. So I guess in a way, what would you say to people who maybe had an ambition to try and do something that isn't funded for their first, you know, because it's interesting that all of you kind of said those films were, you know, your first features that didn't go the funded route and all happened quite quickly, which all then gave you a platform, which meant then people were like, "Oh, great! What's next?"
I watched last week Coherence. Anyone seen that? It's like a horror. It's like a kind of. I'm trying to like educate myself on sci-fi. So, but that's a sci-fi film that was made for like $50,000, and it's really really special. And like in watching that, I imagine, I don't know any of the backstory, but from, I think, you know, the writer-director had been trying to make that for a very long time, and then just went the Kickstarter route, got the 50,000, made a film that's pretty amazing.
Do you know what? I think it's incredibly hard advice to give because it's incredibly risky advice to give. Like with, you know, a film like London to Brighton, we were always one step away from disaster, you know, and actually the stars really aligned for that film in a way. But if any one little thing along that film's journey had changed, then perhaps, you know, I probably wouldn't be sitting here today talking to you good people. I think in a way it's difficult because the industry's changed so much. Like back in the older days, you know, the barrier was access to equipment, to money. Filmmaking was a lot more expensive. Whereas now I think the barrier is impact. How do you create impact in a market that's so saturated? And particularly because people are making films so much more cheaply. You know, Tangerine made on an iPhone, which is, you know, amazing. But so I think, you know, yes, you know, absolutely go ahead, make the film, do it in as guerrilla a way as you want to get it, obviously being safe and everything. But the problem is you've got to think about how you're going to get that film to market, how you're going to get anybody to see it, and what your kind of impact plan around the film's going to be. Because otherwise, you know, there are so many low-budget films now. There's hundreds upon thousands of them globally, and getting that impact is ever more difficult. So I think that's the challenge. It's less about actually getting the film made, which is a challenge, believe me, but, you know, it's not the only challenge that you face.
Well, Rachel, it's as if you read what was next.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's great. It's the perfect segue. Talking about distribution, sales, you know, date and releases, selling your film and your role within it. It's a complete minefield, I guess, when you're starting out. So how do you figure out, you know, is there a place for it in the market? Is it going to have impact? Where, when, how? How did you all figure that out?
I mean, I'm definitely still learning.
Yeah,
like with every single film, you're like, okay, I'm not going to make that type of film. No, and it's possibilities is a really good example. I'm so proud of that film. It's such a beautiful film. It's such an amazing story. We premiered at South by Southwest. The BFI supported. I think the BFI supported a distribution. But we just had this really sad thing that we'd like travel around the country and we'd get to the cinema and there'd be so few people there. And for myself and the filmmakers, it was really, really tough to have this film that had been kind of so, you know, applauded from all kind of critics. And all it did was it made our kind of bond stronger and believe more in the film, but be also very aware that we were very in the red and, you know, the film made absolutely no money. Well, actually, I think it lost money. Every
film I've ever made.
But what it did do is, you know, those guys are making their next film, and we were like, you know what, we want to have a full cinema actually on the next one, so maybe we're going to learn, you know, from that. And it's, you know, it's not always about having a full cinema. I think you kind of learn again, and that's why aligning your goals is really important. But for me, distribution, I'm definitely learning, and I'm no expert.
You know, it's so interesting what you said right at the start of the session about knowing what success looks like for your film. You know, say, for example, you're making a film with a debut director. If you've got the right funders behind the film, you know, getting into a major A-list festival can be the absolute bar for success for that film. You know, exactly. or for other films, and it's definitely about the take and what comes back into the bank and people seeing a return. So that's definitely different film by film. And, oh, man, I mean, it's just so different for every film. The market's always changing. What would work, you know, we were talking about the market last year in comparison to this year. You know, it just changes all the time. And we've definitely, like, the strategy we employed for London to Brighton, we tried to do that with another film that we made, and it just did not work at all. You know, so for London to Brighton, we had a sales and distribution screening and invited literally everybody, which we hadn't considered how risky that was until we were literally at like the Soho screening rooms with all these people filing in. And like our backers at the Film Council were saying like, you know, Rachel, that's a very, very risky thing to do. And we're like, oh, it'll be fine. And it was only when literally every single buyer in the country was sat in that one room that we're outside going like, what have we done? And luckily for us, it worked out because, you know, the film went down really positively and we came out with a batch of offers. But what would normally happen is you go out and the silence is just deafening. And like, or people ask for screeners to show colleagues and you just never hear from them again. And you're like, weeks later, you don't know how that's going to go. I mean, I can tell you what I did for the leveling. Was, you know, that's a very, you know, it's a beautiful, beautiful film, but it's a very delicate film. It's a very, you know, intimate film. And we just, you know, knew that it was going to be a real challenge to get an international sales agent on board because it's such a small cinematic film. So I had this massive spreadsheet. I found this amazing list of sales agents on the Screen Australia website that listed everything they'd done. And I went through the whole list and found about 100 companies that I thought might take the film. And then I just started writing to them. And I would literally have a huge spreadsheet of who'd I'd written to, what day, what they'd said, when I was going to follow up with them again. And I didn't send them the link till they asked for it. So I didn't just send it out. I literally like got them to engage. And then when they didn't email back, I started phoning them. Like literally, like, and I got every single one of those companies to watch the film.
Well, I kind of, sorry.
You know, and then somebody took it.
But we kind of did the same with Appropriate Behavior. Like we had a sales agent we got into Sundance and we got a sales agent from the US and they were kind of say like, oh, we'll sell your film during Sundance, it's gonna be great. And then actually we didn't sell for like 6 months. So it's like, it's about adjusting expectation, but we had offers for international sales and we just didn't think they were good enough. Especially because our film was, you know, had a LGBT, I hate this word, niche, but you know, like we knew there were like, you know, certain people that we were going to like knock on their doors, and we sold, and actually we did a really good business. And obviously it was like time consuming. We still need to, you know, like knock on their door, remind them to give us money if there's anything. But it is kind of, you adjust your expectations. Like we went to Sundance, and that was for me like, you know, a life-changing moment, but still had to, you know, distribute yourself in the world of distribution, which is changing so fast. It's just ridiculous.
I mean, certainly, I think, you know, for us, I think for every film that we've done, there's been a major festival release which has spearheaded everything else. And certainly for a much smaller film, it's really hard to get a sales agent to really get on board if you haven't perhaps got that. Yeah. You know, I know for some films, the sales agent helps get that festival release, you know, and definitely, you know, they're absolute experts. But if you're a little film, sometimes you can't get the sales agent without having got into that festival yourself. So sometimes you have to somehow try and manage that before you can get the sales agent on board.
But I do think, you know, don't ever be too hard on yourself, because the best thing about going to a festival that's chosen your film is that, like, what I'm trying to say is, you know, sometimes you can be forced, you like, okay, it's got to go to this festival, hounding them, and actually when you get the no and everyone's really disappointed and you think it's the end of the world, and then you get a yes and they love your film so much that when you meet the programmer, you know, they're so gushing, they're saying exactly the right things, and suddenly it all makes sense. You know, it might not have been that huge A-list festival, but it's, you know, and again, it's a learning process, because, you know, and now I'm very much of like, you know, all I've got to do is try and make the best film, and whatever festival has it, you know, yes, I'd like it to go to this festival, but, you know, I've got to be realistic. And it's the love, you know, and they program it the right way at the right time. And so yeah, don't be too disheartened.
Yeah, exactly. And also and I want to say, like, even when, you know, with our film, Cameron Post, we got into Sundance, we won the Grand Jury Prize. Sorry, I'm literally covering my mic. But yeah, it took us weeks to sell as well. So again, like, it's like, even, you know, when you're like, oh my God, you know, this is something that not even in my wildest dream could happen, there's still something else but it's still a success, you know, like. Yeah.
But don't, in terms of those festival relationships, here's another plug for the British Council for you. The British Council, I worked for the British Council for 6 years. I used to run those screenings. The British Council run screenings for festival selectors who come over from wherever they're based to the UK to see British work. And they can be instrumental. A new person's taking that over now because Wendy's leaving, but you know, they can be instrumental in helping to broker those contacts, because obviously when you're starting out, you don't have those contacts yourself.
Yeah, and even advising you on, like, oh, maybe this festival might be better, or, you know, you're going for Venice, but actually there's this smaller side festival that does take docs that's getting more, you know.
Yeah. And also do a festival run instead of before your distribution, you know, your actual distribution run. We made like a lot of money with Appropriate Behavior by just sending it to festival.
Because they pay fees, right?
Yeah, exactly, because they pay fees.
really good advice. I think there's lots of, it sounds as well like there's lots of resources out there, so it doesn't feel like you have to start from scratch and do everything on your own.
A bit like in other areas when you're starting out, you've got to find those people who can support you and help you, and they're there really at every stage of the film's journey. You should be able to find help.
So last question from me before I open it up to everyone else. Where do you guys think the industry's at now? And I guess, has it got better at supporting new talent and riskier projects? How are you feeling about things?
I feel like, because I've I feel really good about things at the moment. I think there's a lot of, I think there's been, actually through the BFI, a lot of recent success with first-time writer-directors or first-time feature, and I think that success has got people quite excited. I think within the British industry itself, there's been lots of kind of people moving around in their jobs, and I think that that's been really exciting. And I think for me, BBC Films and Film 4 and BFI, everyone feels like everyone's really out there looking for great talent. So for me, maybe it's the start of the school term, but it definitely feels, good.
I mean, do you know what? It's so interesting. Like, I did this course about 10 years ago called Inside Pictures, where everybody was asking that same question, like, what's the future of the industry? And it's taken 10 years for some of like the horizon scanning, God, that's a horrible corporate phrase, isn't it? That people were doing back then about, what would be like the rise of the FANG, effectively, all those digital like subscription-based services. People were talking about that about 10 years ago, and how could the film industry learn from the music industry and all of that. And I feel like it's only now that that's starting to bed in. I mean, goodness, things are changing so fast. I mean, I think what is true that it's getting increasingly hard to get a theatrical audience for independent film, because independent audiences are skewing older and older now, realistic. My office is in a cinema, so every week at the silver screening, which is the Thursday morning, I watch hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of older people, including my mum, queuing up to see these films that wouldn't necessarily be top of my list to go and watch. And and that's the audience that the independent cinema in its purest collective term, is now attracting. And actually lots of those other audiences who are going to see films in greater numbers, like younger people, they're not going to the independent sites, they're going to the multiplexes. And so there's this real change ahead, I think, in the way that audiences are consuming films. But then, as we found with CALIBRE and Netflix, that you are up against the Hollywood movies to get onto those platforms with that kind of global deal that CALIBRE has secured. And it's amazing what's happened with that film. But, we've had to compete against Hollywood movies, and that's really difficult for a smaller film. So I'm incredibly optimistic about it in some ways, because there's so many good audiences out there, but you've still got to get to them, I think.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I'm optimistic as well, but listening to Rachel...
I've made everybody cynical.
No, but it is true that, like, they need to, I don't know, the sort of the gatekeepers and the funders, like, everything needs to catch up with, like, the right level of distribution. So I guess it... but I think we're on the right track.
One thing, like I say all the time, and I think it very strongly, is like when you're setting out to make a film, you've got to be thinking right from the outset, who is this for?
Yeah.
And the answer might be 100 people, but then you've got to budget it for that level. There's no, audiences can be big, they can be small, they can be niche, they can be specialised, they can be enormous. But that knowledge needs to factor into all the decisions you make along the way to get the budget right, to find the right partners, people for whom the success is going to be understood to be the same. And that really, I think understanding the market is what people perhaps don't fully engage with early enough in their careers. You say, who's your film for? And they go, oh, everyone. I think that's rare for so few projects.
Yeah. That's a perfect note to kind of open it up to questions from you guys. So, okay, someone at the back there with a... Yeah, the mic is coming to you.
Hi, guys. I'm a first-time director currently co-producing my first feature film, and we're at the funding stage. And I was just wondering, what's your sort of producing process? Once you've got your script, do you then go to sales agents and get sales estimates in order to get funding, or do you get your cast first attached and then go and get funding? Or how does it work, or how has it worked with your films?
Well, it really depends on what the film is in terms of like what, if it's commercial enough that you need a star attached. And well, I mean, even if you need a star attached, you probably then need some sort of like link to them, and not just like as an independent producer. So either like yes, either a sales agent or, you know, even like, I don't know if you have an agent even through your agency. But yeah, it really depends. Like if it's like more of a bit of a more indie, then I would go towards funding body and looking for funding that way. But yeah, so I don't really, I want to know what Rachel is. She's my new guru now.
God. It's a big question. That is a huge question. That's actually a really, really massive question. I think it depends who the film's for, how much you think it's got to cost. Is it commercial? Is it cultural? If it's a cultural film, you know, then obviously you want to be knocking at the door of the BFI, really, or, you know, or the BFI network if you're at an earlier stage in your career. You know, it's a big, big question. I think the first question has to be, who's the film for? And how much do you think it should cost? And sometimes thinking about, I did a session on this yesterday, you probably all heard, so I'm going to repeat myself. But, you know, the question about how much a film should cost, sometimes it needs to cost more than you originally think, if you need a star or a big-name director. So these all, you know, your producer has to decide all of this, really, before you start going out there to look for money, I think.
Thank you. Question down here.
Hi, a question for Rachel, because I recently saw CALIBRE and I absolutely loved it. I thought it was absolutely brilliant. And so I was wondering, really interested in the sort of long gestation period for that film to come out, and if it ever changed in terms of who it was for, or other similar films, or how that sort of changed along the way.
What changed? Thank you for watching CALIBRE. That's brilliant. What changed was the market. Actually, like obviously the film like developed creatively along the way and got better and stronger as it was worked upon. But when we first started making that film, we imagined it had been cinemas. You know, like everybody does. We thought it had played a festival, be quite a commercial film for the cinema. You know, and actually as we went along, and particularly even after we'd started making the film, I think we shot the film in 2016. Like just cinema. You know, with Netflix rising up, we were like, God, you know, who's going to see this film? But actually, what has happened has been the absolute 100% best thing for that film. It's had a global audience off the back of a really, really lovely festival premiere at Edinburgh, where it won the Michael Powell Award. But, you know, that took so long to work out how exactly to position it there and, you know, getting agreement with such a major global player about when they were going to release it. You know, obviously negotiating with them to have a festival screening at all, because that's not guaranteed. So, you know, we were exceptionally fortunate to land that deal, which our sales agent did for us. I'd like to say it was me, but it wasn't. I did not do that deal.
Yes, question down here.
Thanks. I was just wondering, for all three of you, if like a first-time director, someone that's never directed a feature before, like somehow manages to get into contact with you guys, what's the minimum level of experience that you kind of need of them to feel comfortable in giving them a shot? Like, let's say they've got a vision and everything, but what's the minimum level that you'd feel comfortable?
I would say some short films. I mean, some proof of concept, either proof of concept of feature or like some short films, and ideally they've gone to some festivals, and yes. Like
exactly.
Yeah.
But I think, you know, these days with, you know, the filmmaking firepower we all literally have in our pockets, I would expect somebody to have made something, even if it's just a fun film with like their own kids or something, or their dog. You know, like when somebody comes to you and they've literally made nothing, you think, but you want to be a filmmaker, right? Yeah. Surely you should be filming every spare moment and working on this progression. Like if somebody's made nothing at all, like I'm not talking about funded films, I just mean literally not put shots together and created a narrative or a story out of them, then I would probably, I'd need to see something.
And just understanding that we're not doing short films anymore.
Oh, we do. We still do.
You do.
Yeah,
oh my
yeah,
God,
I'm doing
like,
shorts.
You guys, God, like
we're filmmakers. We make films.
I was driving the van of my last short films, and then that made me say like I'm not gonna do it anymore. I mean, like actually, having said that, we've made it as a company. I just wasn't on set for that.
I struggle with short films, but I do them because I sometimes meet that talent that I feel so excited about that I'm like, you know what, I want to be in on this one. And like, I think
you want to know how you are with the director on set. Like stepping out onto a feature with somebody you've not made anything with before is a bit of a big scary step.
I mean, I don't do loads, but I'm definitely at the like I'm going to do 2 in the next 6 months, and again with directors that I'm really excited about, and Yeah.
Well, I mean, we're 4 of us at Wellington Films.
Okay.
There's me and Al, and then there's Tom and Anna, 2 producers that work with us as well. So between us, we do.
Yeah, between us, yeah.
So Tom's producing a BFI-backed short in the early part of next year or the latter part of this year, and I'm doing some TV shows for deaf audiences at the moment, which is not big films, but brilliant to do. Fantastic. I think we always, for us, we just always want to be in production. Like, we'll produce anything. We won't.
Okay, yeah. And actually, we did do a short film this summer, which was a proof of concept, though. So I guess it's a little different. Okay, I feel like it. Sorry. I had a baby recently, so that's why.
Go for it.
Hi. Sorry, is that not on? Sorry. On that. I've made 2 short films, both of which were completely crap because the first time we didn't manage to work the camera very well, and so now in October we're shooting 2 more. One was proof of concept and one's a new short film. So hopefully they'll be a bit better. But at what point because I mean, it's really difficult to learn all these different skills that you need to have, and it's also really difficult to find the right people and to persuade them to do stuff for you when you don't know anybody and your mates don't really know anything about all that sort of stuff. So at what point, someone said to me, well, you need to make 16 shit films before you can make a decent film. I mean, can you give me, how many, I don't know if you know anybody who doesn't know that much and who's had to self-teach, but I mean, can you comment at all or give me some advice?
I don't know, I do think you just got to persevere because honestly, like, I remember on the possibilities are endless. Like, I knew nothing. Like, I kept saying, oh yeah, I've been a producer in TV, but I mean, it's so far removed. And I would be in that room being like, God, I don't know anyone, but I'll just stand here and, drink my drink and go to the loo 20 times or something. So I just think you've got to keep, like, you obviously want to do it, so just keep doing it and keep getting advice and, keep coming to these things. And yeah, it will happen if you believe it's going to happen, I think.
No, go for it.
I was going to say, I just remember, like when we were trying to go from shorts to features, we went to this one-day training thing that Arista, there used to be a training organisation called Arista, a long time ago. In about 2003, I went to this thing called the Business of Development. And I remember just the penny dropped that day on how things fitted together from a business point of view. And I'd been to loads of things like this, and I'd always been, don't really get it, oh, it's not really going in. And I think I just went to enough things where just the penny just dropped one day, and I was like, oh, I get it now, I can see how it all works together. And then after that, it became easier, definitely. And just as Julia said, just really, really try and just take in as much as you can.
Yeah. But also, like, this is not my experience, but when Desiree always says that, like, her first short film, like, she hated them and they went nowhere. And it's because she was trying to sort of, like, mimic some other directors. They're like, oh, this is what a short film looks like from the outside. And then it wasn't until she did The Slope, which literally was just, like, she was late for, like, an assignment in her class, and she just had to film something. So it means, yeah, it's all, like, try to, keep on going until, like, you'll find your voice and your voice will come true.
I have to say as well, just to add to that, as someone who, I was at the BFI till 2 weeks ago, so that's why they kept putting it. But as someone who used to look at a lot of short films, I have seen short films from filmmakers who had made quite a few crap things before they made something good. And so actually, I think it's, as these guys are saying, you keep going, because I think it's a craft, and craft can develop, so yeah, you keep going. There was a question down here. Oh, that might.
I've made a short. It's like a proof of concept. It's gotten to about 6 festivals, which is great. Which has helped me develop who the audience is, because it's kind of primarily in one country at the moment. So I'm trying to make that transition now. I know it's going to take time, and I'm actually really busy at the moment, so I'm kind of doing everything. So I haven't. That's like a whole other level. So I think I'm at that point where I'm trying to partner up with someone who can help me. But yeah, in terms of have any of you had a proof of concept that you've gone to make a feature with at all?
Well, I guess The Slope for us was the Slope, the web series that Desiree did. I remember I sent it to Tom Abel at Peccadillo and said, hey, we're thinking of doing a feature version of this. And immediately, I didn't know him. I had done no feature before, and he gave me a meeting. during Cannes. So yeah, so I would say like that like, I mean, that was, what was amazing is that it was a series of episodes, so you really stayed with this character for a while. But yeah, so I definitely think the proof of concept is great.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it depends how, I think pilots can be really hard to make, because if you don't absolutely get the production values you want to get in the feature or have the casting quite right, they can work against you. But the first film I made was based on a short. The characters from that short picked up and plopped into the feature, very much so. And they were the same actors in the feature as well. So actually the short was like a perfect proof of concept for that film.
And it's more of like a calling card in terms of like distribution for shorts. Is there not many avenues for that?
I mean, you hear stories of an occasional short that's done incredibly well financially, but it's never happened to us, I can say. But I think as well, like with the short proof of concept has to work on its own, within its own, you know, it has to work on its own as a short. I think if it's just made as a proof of concept, then I think they're less successful. I think it has to work as a narrative piece if it's a fiction.
But yeah, but also rather than giving in the hands of someone who's going to distribute it, you want to put it online and kind of build a buzz. You know, with The Slope, again, it was a web series, so it just went online, and that's when, you know, you can those numbers. You go on Vimeo staff, then it's great.
Well, we had a Vimeo staff pick recently. We were so thrilled.
No, it's amazing.
Something like 130,000 people watched it in like 2 days. I mean, who knew? It's like witchcraft.
There was a question right at the back. That guy in the middle. Okay.
Hello. Maybe this question is primarily for Rachel. What's it like being based outside of London and trying to get a first film developed?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, you know, there are pluses and minuses to literally everything. I mean, I think and there's some lovely Nottingham colleagues down here. Hello, we all know each other. We are the film industry of Nottingham. The great thing is just the cost. You know, we live in a house, not a room. We've got an office big enough for 6 people in a cinema. You know, and in London, we just physically could not have any of those things. So that's like the massive, massive benefit is you can be part of a filmmaking community where you all know each other quite well. Cost is just such a huge thing. And there is lots of regional support available if you're based outside of London. So that's all fantastic. The downside is, of course, you're not in London, which is you're still where the film industry really is. And, you know, the number of times we're on a train down to London having a meeting we've been waiting for weeks, and we've probably had to buy a really expensive ticket because the person we want to meet wants to meet first thing in the morning, and you're halfway to London when you get the phone call. And you go, no, it's fine, no, we can, yeah, of course we can reschedule. Thinking, oh, you know, so that is like a huge downside, and it's not as easy just to casually meet up with people. Like I'm coming down to London next Wednesday, and I've booked like 9 meetings, like all bam, 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 bam. But you know, you can't just sort of like happen around and have like a casual chat with somebody over a coffee at Stephen Street. That's much harder. So, you know, pluses, minuses.
Got time for, oh my gosh, now you guys all put up your hands and we have time for one question. Where was this vigor at the beginning? Okay, there's time for one question.
Who's got the best one?
I feel like she does, that lady. Yes, put your hand up and make it a good one. Okay, the microphone is coming to you. And everyone else, you'll just have to go for them afterwards in the break.
Thank you very much. As a producer, I find myself in a weird situation where you're trying to raise money and you don't have a known talent. And, you know, you send your script across to loads of people and they tell you how amazing your script is. And then you send it to financiers and then you're like, who's the big name attached to your project? And then you go to the agents and they say, well, have you got the money? So what in that situation, if as a producer, you find yourself in this situation, but just because you guys have got some great faces in your films. So what would you do if you're like first or second time feature filmmakers?
I'm just trying to think without like truth management. No, I mean, like I can only talk about Skate Kitchen because that's the only experience I've had with any kind of talent, I suppose. And with that, it was kind of, we were saying, look, we know what the budget is and we're pretty sure we can get it, but we, you know that we really want Jaden Smith in this film. So it was slightly, I'm not really helping you. I feel like it was just slightly chicken and egg. Like we did get Jaden, and at the same time we were getting the money because we said, look, we promise we'll get Jaden. And so, yeah. I don't know, maybe
it's
that's...
really hard. I mean, it's so hard increasingly, especially because of the rise of high-end TV. Lots and lots of directors and actors are really, really, really busy, and they're doing stuff like with TV. You know, you've got a transmission date before you've even written the show. So there's a great degree of certainty to those roles, and so people are very keen to do them, which doesn't leave people much time in the calendar to do films, and particularly not small independent films where they're not going to get paid very much. So I think one thing that you can do with a first-time film is try and make a film that doesn't need stars. And so, for example, London to Brighton didn't have any stars. We had amazing, like the most amazing actors, but we didn't need to have that big name star because the film was being made for a really low budget. And then that created the calling card for the director and for us to go on for future films. And the other thing we do is we work with casting directors. Yeah. Really, really, really amazing casting directors who help us with those relationships.
Yeah, and
of course you have to pay them.
Yeah, and it was the same for us for Proper Behavior. I mean, like, our biggest name was Scott Adsit from 30 Rock, you know, who nobody knew. So yeah, but I feel like, yeah, it's about finding the right casting director is going to find you, like, those amazing faces that then people are going to interested in discover, because the industry loves, like, discovering a new talent. So give them an amazing talent that they're going to be pretending that they discovered it, and it's, you know, they'd be happy with that.
I mean, it's true, like festivals in particular love a debut, whether it's like a breakout performance or an amazing debut from a new director. And I think that it's becoming like a thing now. Like, look at Lady Macbeth, God's Own Country, The Leveling, Calibre, you know.
Yeah, we worked with Sasha Lane, and, you know, like, literally, like, it was like, wait, can we really get her? She just exploded. And it's just, yeah, so it's like, it's a massive...
So guys, on that amazing note, join me in thanking Rachel, Julia, and